I remember one of the many things that I would do when I began to be in my blended family, and probably even before that, the blended family occurred. Shortly after my divorce, I was very adamant about wanting to still control. I had a serious control issue in my previous marriage, and even once the divorce occurred, I was still very controlling as far as how I wanted things to be, even when the children were not in my presence. So when it was time for them to go visit their father, I wanted to control how he handled things in his home. Um, Part of the issue was when we were married, I was the one who was primarily providing all the rules, the discipline, the direction, and he just kind of followed suit. So I thought that, based on the conversation he and I had, that he would do the same thing. That he would consult me, we would talk about it, and I basically would give the direction as to what should be done, and he would follow suit. Well, let me tell you, it didn't happen that way. And that was the breakdown a lot in our co-parenting, because I had this expectation that he was going to do what I wanted him to do, and not necessarily what he thought was best as a parent. I think sometimes we forget that both parents have the right to make a decision related to the child, whether they're in our presence or not. So when my children are with me, it has to be trusted that I'm going to make the best decision for them. And when they're with my ex, I have to trust that he's going to make the best decision for them as well. Now, if he's doing things that's going to put them in harm's way, then obviously that's a different conversation we should have. Or if I'm putting the kids in harm's way, that's a different conversation we should have. However, if it's just a matter of opinions, or I will even say imaginations, because sometimes we imagine things that are happening in the other home that we don't really know for sure, and we're doing that because we're not privy to exactly what's going on. So we sit around and we guess, and we make up all these thoughts in our head of worst case scenarios of what we think is occurring, because there is a lack of communication going on between you and the co-parent. The best recommendation I have for a situation like that is you're just going to have to trust that the other parent is making the best decision. Now, if you find out factual information that proves that what you're believing is incorrect, and it is things that are happening, or there are things that are happening that are not for the best interest of the child, then that's when you need to have a conversation or get other people involved to try to help mediate that situation. But you can't have good co-parenting if you are making assumptions about the other parent, if you're trying to control the other parent, if you're trying to dictate what's going on in the other parent's home. Now, a perfect co-parenting situation, obviously, is when two parents are able to come together and say, look, this is how we're going to operate. We're going to try to do these things together. I remember I had a friend who was going through a divorce, and when they did finally have their divorce settled, they made a decision to live on the same street. They made a decision to keep their children in the same schools. Even their homes were bedrooms were decorated very similar, to give the children almost kind of like a seamless process related to the separation and the divorce and going between two homes. Obviously, the children understood that, okay, this is mom's home, this is dad's home, but they both lived on the same street. They kept the kids in the same school. Their visitation was pretty much every day. But that isn't typically how it works. Typically, it's a situation where the child is with one parent more than the other parent, and it's not necessarily shared. You do have many circumstances where it is shared, but in the cases where it's not shared and you aren't really working together to raise the child, but you're more so working separately, where when the child comes to my house, I'm doing my thing with the child, and I'm raising them according to the way my morals and values are, and when they go over to your home, you're doing the same thing. It's important that we try to eliminate any additional issues that may occur when we are not making the best decision for our child. So, for instance, if you feel like the other parent is not doing something right, normally the other parent can tell that in your attitude, in your conversation, and sometimes even how you communicate with the child, because you'll start to question the child, not necessarily to find out how great of a time they had with the other parent, but more so to pry, to try to figure out, okay, what are they doing wrong? Is it something that I can tell them about that they need to fix? I remember going through this with my ex, where every time my children would go over to his house, I would almost anticipate that they were going to come back and tell me something that I was going to have to fire off a text about, or fire off an email, or pick up the phone and fuss about. And I think he started to do the same thing. We both were doing that, and the children were caught in the middle, and before we know it, there was a lot of manipulation going on. There was a lot of confusion going on. And once I made the decision to say that I was no longer going to make assumptions about what was going on in the home, I was no longer going to ask the children about what was going on in the home in a manner to pry, but in a manner to really just inquire, to make sure they had a really good time, and if they wanted to share, they were free to share. If they didn't want to share, they didn't have to. It wasn't every time they came home it was a drill, or they had to be worried if they were going to be questioned. That puts a lot of pressure on the child. It puts a lot of pressure on your co-parenting relationship with the other parent. And the best thing to do is to try to eliminate things that are going to try to cause dysfunction. It's already a challenge for the children, and I've said this many times, going between two homes. The best thing parents can do is work together for the best interest of the child, and try to make co-parenting the most effective by not assuming, by not imagining what you think is going on in the other home, by not trying to control the other home, but by making a decision to be the best parent you possibly can be for the child. That's the goal.